The auctioneer's voice was a shard of glass in the heat-shimmered air, grating and cheap. Dust, fine as ground bone, coated every surface, clinging to the sweat on the faces of the men gathered in the derelict barnyard. It was a place of endings. Elara stood at the back, a statue carved from shadow and grief, the black of her dress drinking the relentless sun. For 5 years, since the fever took David and the babe that followed him, her world had been this same oppressive silence, this same bleached-out landscape of loss. She came to these wretched affairs not to buy, but to watch things break, to see other lives dismantled. It was a bitter communion. Today, they brought out the last of the Miller stock. Not cattle or horses, but people. 3 sisters, their hands bound loosely before them, were led onto the splintered block. The crowd shifted, a low murmur of pity and disdain. They were burdens. Anya, the eldest, held her chin high, a fragile fortress of defiance. Lena, her eyes wide with a terror that seemed too large for her slight frame, stood so close to Anya she was nearly hidden. And Sophia, the youngest, stared at her own swollen belly as if it were a strange and terrible planet she had been forced to inhabit. All 3 were pregnant. Liabilities, the auctioneer spat, waving a dismissive hand. Indentured, but their time is near. The late Miller's poor planning is your potential gain, or your folly, he grinned, revealing teeth the color of old corn. Who'll start the bidding for this fertile lot? Silence answered him. It was a heavy, suffocating thing. The men looked away, shuffling their feet. Who would take on 3 women, 3 mouths to feed, soon to be 6? They were seen not as mothers, but as monuments to a poor investment. A horse with a lame leg held more value. Elara felt a familiar, cold ache in her womb, a phantom hollowness that had been her constant companion. She saw not liabilities, but a reflection of her own stolen future. The life she and David had planned, the children they would have raised on their small homestead, all of it turned to dust, just like the ground beneath her worn boots. A slick, oily voice cut through the stillness. $10. Silas Croft stepped forward, his shadow falling long and predatory across the sisters. He was a vulture in a tailored coat, a man who fed on the misfortunes of others, buying up failed farms and broken lives for pennies. A cruel smile played on his lips as he looked at the women, his gaze lingering on their rounded forms with an owner's appraisal. He wasn't buying mothers, he was buying stock. The auctioneer's eyes lit with relief. $10 from Mr. Croft. Do I hear 15? The silence returned, thicker this time, laced with the finality of Croft's claim. The sisters flinched as one. Anya's facade of courage crumbled, her shoulders slumping in defeat. The gavel was raised. It hung in the air, a suspended moment of doom. In that sliver of time, Elara saw it all, Croft's leering triumph, the sisters' despair, the ghosts of her own lost family whispering in the wind. The silence in her heart, the one she had nurtured for 5 years, suddenly screamed. 20. The word was rust and disuse, torn from a throat that had forgotten how to speak with force. Every head turned. Elara stepped from the shadows, her form stark and unyielding. The sun caught the silver locket at her throat, the one holding David's likeness. Croft's smile curdled. He looked her up and down, dismissing her. The widow? What use do you have for them? His voice was a sneer. Elara's eyes, chips of flint, met his. 25. Croft's face flushed with anger. He would not be challenged by this ghost of a woman. 30-50, Elara said, the word ringing with the clarity of a bell. A gasp rippled through the crowd. It was a fortune for a woman alone, for land that barely produced. It was everything she had left. Croft stared, his greed warring with his pride. He saw the cold, unshakable certainty in her gaze and knew he could not win this battle without revealing the true depth of his cruelty, and even he had a reputation to maintain. He spat on the ground. Let the madwoman have them. They'll be her ruin. The auctioneer, stunned, slammed the gavel down. Sold. To the widow. Elara walked forward, her steps measured and deliberate. She did not look at Croft. She did not look at the stunned faces of the men. She looked only at the three sisters, whose eyes now held a new emotion, more fragile and more terrifying than fear, a sliver of hope. She paid the auctioneer with coin from a worn leather pouch, the metal heavy and real in her palm. Then, with a small, sharp knife she carried for mending harnesses, she walked to the block and, one by one, cut the ropes that bound their hands. The journey to the homestead was a pilgrimage through a world of baked earth and brittle light. The sun was a hammer, beating down on the four women as they walked. Elara led the way, her stride long and purposeful, a stark contrast to the hesitant, shuffling steps of the sisters behind her. No words were spoken. The only sounds were the crunch of their boots on the parched ground and the whisper of the wind through skeletal sagebrush. The landscape was a mirror of Elara's soul, vast, empty, and scarred by a relentless sun. To the sisters, it was a terrifying expanse, a world away from the shaded confines of the Miller farm. They clutched the meager bundles of their belongings, their gazes darting nervously across the horizon as if expecting some new horror to emerge from the shimmering heat. After 2 hours that felt like a lifetime, the homestead appeared, a low shape huddled against the vastness. It was a small, sturdy cabin of hewn logs, a testament to David's hands, flanked by a barn and a fenced-in corral. The place was impeccably clean, obsessively ordered, but it was a sterile tidiness. There were no stray chickens pecking in the yard, no laundry dancing on a line, no sign of the messy, vibrant pulse of life. It was a home held in stasis, preserved in the amber of grief. Elara pushed open the cabin door, revealing a single room, shadowed and cool. A stone hearth dominated one wall, cold and black. A sturdy table with 2 chairs stood in the center. A bed, neatly made, occupied one corner. "There," she said, her voice flat, gesturing to a partitioned-off space behind a thick curtain. "You will sleep there." She pointed to the stove, the pantry. "The food is yours. The well is outside. Do not waste the water." Her instructions were clipped, practical, devoid of any warmth. She was providing sanctuary, not welcome. The sisters huddled together in their designated corner, a small island of shared fear in the ocean of Elara's solitude. They spoke in whispers, their words swallowed by the oppressive silence of the cabin. Elara moved with a quiet, ghost-like efficiency, tending to her chores with a focus that seemed designed to block out their very presence. She ate her meals alone at the table, a solitary queen in her kingdom of sorrow. But their presence was an undeniable fact. It was a rustle of fabric behind the curtain, a shared sigh in the night, the soft pad of 3 extra pairs of feet on the floorboards. It was a subtle shift in the cabin's atmosphere, a disturbance in the dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. Elara found herself listening, against her will, to the rhythm of their breathing as they slept. A few days later, Lena, the youngest, was drawing water from the well when the heat overwhelmed her. She swayed, her face ashen, and crumpled to the ground. Elara was inside, mending a leather strap, when she heard the bucket clang against the stone well. A primal, forgotten instinct surged through her. She was outside in a heartbeat, her solitary calm shattered. She knelt, lifting Lena's head into her lap, her hand surprisingly gentle as she brushed the hair from the girl's damp forehead. Anya and Sophia rushed out, their faces masks of panic. Elara looked up at them, and for the first time, they saw a crack in her hardened facade. They saw not a cold warden, but a woman shaken by a profound and buried fear. "Get a wet cloth," she commanded, but the harshness was gone, replaced by a raw urgency. Quickly, as Anya pressed the cool cloth to her sister's face, Elara held Lena, a fragile weight in her arms, and felt the tremors of a life that was not her own, a vulnerability she had paid a fortune to protect. The silence of her world had been broken, not by a word, but by a near fall, a shared moment of terror that bound the 4 of them together in the unforgiving sun. Life on the homestead began to find a new, fragile rhythm. The silence that had once been Elara's shield slowly receded, replaced by the quiet industry of 4 women working toward a common survival. The sisters, sensing the shift that had occurred by the well, began to emerge from their shell of fear. They started small, sweeping the porch without being asked, pulling the most stubborn weeds from the parched vegetable garden, their movements tentative at first, then growing in confidence. Elara watched them from a distance, her expression unreadable. She issued her instructions in the same sparse, direct manner, but the lessons themselves were a form of communion. She showed Anya how to properly sight down the barrel of the old rifle, her hand briefly covering the younger woman's to adjust her grip. She taught Sophia which desert herbs were safe for tea and which were poison, their fingers brushing as they sorted through the dried leaves. She worked with Lena to repair a sagging section of the corral fence, the rhythmic pounding of their hammers a strange new music in the quiet air. These were not gestures of affection, but of necessity, yet in this harsh land, necessity was its own kind of intimacy. The homestead itself began to transform. A line of washed clothes, small shifts and mended dresses, flapped in the breeze, a banner of defiant domesticity. The scent of baking bread, coarse and grainy, sometimes filled the cabin, a stark contrast to the sterile smell of dust and wood smoke that had lingered for years. One evening, as the sky bruised purple and a rare storm gathered on the horizon, the four of them sat inside, the wind howling around the eaves of the cabin. The fire in the hearth, now a nightly ritual, crackled and spat, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The tension of the storm outside seemed to seep into the room, a heavy, expectant silence. It was Sophia, the quietest of the three, who broke it. She began to hum a low, sweet melody that was both mournful and hopeful. It was a lullaby from a place they had lost, a thread of sound weaving a tapestry of memory and longing in the small, warm space. Anya and Lena joined in, their voices soft harmonies that wrapped around Sophia's melody. They sang for their lost home, for their uncertain future, for the tiny, sleeping lives within them. Ilara sat perfectly still in her chair by the fire, her back to them. Her hands were clenched in her lap, her knuckles white. She did not turn. She did not speak. She did not join their song. But she did not stop it, either. A single tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek, glittering in the firelight before falling, silently, onto the dark fabric of her dress. She was no longer just a warden. She was a witness. In the nights that followed, she would lie awake and listen to their hushed conversations from behind the curtain. They spoke of the cruelty of the Miller farm, of the fear of being separated, of the hope that their children might know a different life. Ilara learned their histories in fragments, piecing together a story of profound trauma and even more profound resilience. And in listening, she felt the thick walls she had built around her own heart begin to crumble, stone by painful stone. The dog, a stray she'd never named but fed scraps to, began to bark at the eastern horizon in the mornings, a low, anxious sound directed at nothing they could see. A faint dust cloud, a distant smudge against the blue sky, would appear and then vanish. The signs were there. A storm was coming, but this one would not be of wind and rain. The day Silas Croft arrived, the air was still and heavy, holding its breath. The nameless dog, usually silent, let out a single, sharp bark before slinking under the porch, whining. Ilara was splitting firewood, the rhythmic thud of the axe a measure of her newfound peace. She paused, her head tilted, listening. And then she heard it, the steady, arrogant beat of approaching horses. She placed the axe down gently and wiped her hands on her dress. Inside the cabin, the sisters froze, the sound a harbinger of a past they thought they had escaped. Anya grabbed a heavy iron poker from the hearth, her face pale but determined. Lena and Sophia huddled together, their hands protectively on their bellies. Ilara stepped onto the porch, her small frame silhouetted against the dark interior of the cabin. She waited. Croft reined in his horse a few yards from the house, flanked by two hard-faced men whose hands rested near the pistols on their hips. He surveyed the homestead, a look of contemptuous amusement on his face. The clothesline, the tended garden, it was all an affront to his sense of order. "Widow," he called out, his voice slick with false courtesy. "I've come to correct a mistake." Ilara remained silent, her stillness a challenge. Her eyes were fixed on him, 2 points of cold, hard light. "A woman's bid at a scrapper's auction holds no legal weight," he lied smoothly. "I had a prior claim on their indenture, a debt owed to me by the late Miller. These girls, and what they carry, are my property." He said the word property with a smug finality, as if it were an undeniable law of nature. Ilara's voice, when it came, was dangerously quiet. "They are not for sale," Croft chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. Everything has a price, old woman. Now, send them out. We can do this peacefully, or we can do it my way. He nodded to his men, a silent command. One of them dismounted, his boots crunching on the dry earth as he started toward the porch. He was halfway there when Elara disappeared into the cabin. She re-emerged a moment later, and she was no longer just a grieving widow. In her hands, she held David's rifle. She did not raise it in a panic, she held it with a familiar, practiced ease, the worn stock settled perfectly against her shoulder. The transformation was absolute. The 5 years of solitude, of fending for herself in this unforgiving land, had honed her into something Croft and his men could not possibly comprehend. They saw a woman in a black dress, they did not see the predator whose territory they had just invaded. "Get off my land," she said, her voice devoid of fear. The man paused, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He glanced back at Croft, who sneered. "She's bluffing." "Get the girls." The man took another step. A deafening crack echoed across the yard. The bullet kicked up a puff of dust an inch from his boot. He yelped and scrambled back. Croft's face contorted in a mask of fury. "You foolish bitch," he roared, drawing his own pistol. "Get her!" The world exploded into motion. Elara fired again, not at Croft, but at the support beam of the porch overhang above his head. Splinters rained down, causing his horse to rear in panic. She used the moment to duck behind the thick logs of the cabin wall, reloading with a calm efficiency that was terrifying to behold. The two hired men, recovering their nerve, charged forward, firing wildly. Bullets chewed at the wood around her. Inside, Anya wedged the heavy table against the door, creating a barricade. She, Lena, and Sophia crouched low, their world reduced to the sounds of gunfire and splintering wood, their shared terror a prayer for the woman outside. Elara was a ghost, using the angles of her own home as a weapon. She fired from a window, then from behind the stone well, her shots precise and purposeful. She wasn't trying to kill them, she was trying to break them. One man screamed as a bullet tore through the fleshy part of his arm. The other fell back as his pistol was shot from his hand, his fingers numb and stinging. Croft, his face a mess of rage and disbelief, finally charged the cabin himself. He burst onto the porch, intending to kick down the door. Elara met him there. She didn't fire. She swung the heavy rifle like a club, the steel barrel catching him across the jaw with a sickening crunch. He staggered back, spitting blood and a broken tooth, his eyes wide with shock. He had expected a victim. He had found a warrior. Defeated, bleeding, and utterly humiliated, he stumbled back to his horse. His men, one clutching a wounded arm, the other his throbbing hand, followed suit. Silas Croft looked back one last time at the woman standing on the porch, a silent, formidable guardian framed by the home she was defending. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a cold, hard promise. He wheeled his horse around and fled, his retreat leaving nothing but a cloud of dust and the ringing silence of victory. The echo of the last gunshot faded, leaving a silence more profound than any that had come before. The dust, stirred by the panicked retreat of Croft's horses, slowly settled back onto the earth, a golden veil in the late afternoon sun. Elara stood on the porch, the heavy rifle still warm in her hands. Her knuckles were bruised, a thin line of blood trickled from a cut on her temple, but her posture was unbroken. She watched the dust cloud of her enemies disappear over the horizon, ensuring they were truly gone. Slowly, the cabin door creaked open. Anya emerged first, her eyes wide, the iron poker still clutched in her hand. She saw Elara, saw the blood, and rushed forward. Lena and Sophia followed, their faces tear-streaked but etched with a new, fierce awe. Without a word, Anya took a clean cloth from her pocket and gently dabbed at the cut on Elara's temple. It was a simple, intimate gesture that spoke more than words ever could. It was an anointing. In that moment, the last wall between them crumbled into dust. Elara allowed the touch, her stiff shoulders relaxing for the first time. She looked from Anya's determined face to Lena's trembling relief to Sophia's quiet gratitude. She saw not her burdens, but her garrison. They had faced the storm together and held the line. That evening, they did not eat in shifts or in silence. They sat together at the table, the four of them, the empty chair that had long been a shrine to David's memory now simply a part of their circle. The meal was meager, but it felt like a feast. The home was no longer a tomb of memory, it was a fortress, consecrated by their shared courage.